All right. Hi, my name is Lori Groh. I'm co-owner at Shoreside Therapies. Today we have Deva Murphy, our new therapist at Shoreside Therapies. Not new to the field, of course, but new to us. And so excited to have you on board. So excited to talk with you today. So welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate it. I'm
Yeah.
really happy to be here, and I can say this is the first time I've ever done a Facebook Live, so I can kind of check that off of my social
Yes.
media bucket list.
Yeah. I'm sure that was on the top one. That
It,
was
it
the
was,
top
it
one
was.
on the list.
Yep.
So, David, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about your background, and then I want to hear a little bit about why you decided to start getting into therapy. I always find that to be an interesting place to go. So, could you tell us a little bit about your background first?
Absolutely. So, I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been practicing here in Milwaukee for about 7, 8 years at this point. Kind of live in the greater Milwaukee area, so this is kind of like my hometown. And I would say there's probably two main things that really kind of propelled me to be a therapist and felt really important for me. So I would say the first thing is I grew up with my parents who were both in helping professions. So
Oh,
my mom was and still is a psychotherapist, and my
wow.
father was a first responder for his entire career.
Oh,
So,
wow.
from an early age, I had, two pivotal people in my life who their careers were helping people. So, I mean, of course, that just kind of became a part of who I was. And, it's just been awesome having two people that are so important to me also being kind of mentors of how to help people and how to embody, just being a person that can kind of be caring yet empowering for people.
Yeah,
So,
that's really cool. So you're
yeah.
like the Tiger Woods of therapy, right? Like your
Yes.
started off right at like 4 or 5 years old. I know what I'm
Yep.
doing here. That's awesome.
Yep.
So
It's just
cool.
kind of ingrained in me.
Yes,
So
that's awesome.
I would say that. And also, the other member of my family, my brother, he is another reason why I really wanted to help people. He is about 2 years younger than me, and so we were very close growing up. And in his teenage years and young adult years, he really struggled with some significant mental health and addiction issues.
Yeah.
So, seeing him struggle with that and also kind of being impacted by his struggles again was, I think, just another major thing in my life that made me want to learn how to help those people and to empower people to help themselves.
Yeah. What a powerful experience and how that would shape
Hmm.
how we see people and how we
Yep,
see difficulties even,
absolutely.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes. So tell me a little bit about the types of clients you work with. Who's a good fit for you? Like who would be your ideal
Hmm.
person walking in the door?
And I think that's a great question, because not only when you're looking for a therapist, you want to feel like you have a good connection with that person, but
Right.
you also want to know that that person can help you with whatever it is that you're specifically coming to therapy for. So I would say I have kind of like three specialties, and then I work with kind of a number of other things below that. So my first specialty would be working with eating disorders.
Yeah.
And under that kind of bucket would also just be, people who want to work on improving their body image, how they view themselves, how they talk to themselves, improving self esteem and confidence, and improving just, I think, your relationship with food and weight and movement and exercise. So that
Yeah.
would probably be like my first bucket.
Yeah.
Um,
That
my
and that
second,
is really, to pause you on that for a second, that's a
yeah.
very, very needed
Hmm.
area, especially at Shoreside. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been looking for someone that specializes in it, and in eating disorders, not just eating disorders, because it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be. in that realm. Sometimes it can be body image, or that somebody
Correct.
wants to just have a better relationship with food and
Mhm.
exercise, and some of
Yeah,
those thoughts that get in the way, and it's
hmm
all linked together, and self-esteem becomes a
it
part of
is.
that. And how I think the majority of us in this world, or in our culture, at least in the American culture, we relate to how we feel about ourselves with how we look,
Yep,
or how others see how we look. Um,
absolutely.
so important to start to have a healthier, more
hmm
realistic vision of what we want for ourselves. Yeah.
I completely agree. We have a lot of diet culture, and we have just I think social media in general can oftentimes portray an unrealistic image of what we as people need to be like. And I think, especially sometimes as women, what we're supposed to, quote unquote, look like. So that's a huge focus of my practice. And I think that it's just an increasing struggle that so many people unfortunately deal with.
Right, right. And
hmm
and we were kind of joking prior about the filters, but
Yes,
that's
yes.
another piece of, like, it used to be just famous people had, when they were on covers of magazines, it was,
Mhm.
you kind of knew there was some touch-ups. Now everybody has that capability, and it's
Yeah.
kind of a nice thing, but not a nice thing in other areas.
hmm
It's hard
Yep.
to know what's real and what's not real.
I
Yeah.
think that's a really good point. So I think that would probably be one of my specialties. And my other two specialties would
Yeah.
be trauma as well as loss and grief. So those would probably be my specialties that I would love to work with if you are looking for a therapist. And I also work with anxiety, depression, just, wanting to improve maybe your relationships in your life. And I think the other important thing to note, though, is that you don't have to have a huge, major, significant issue going on in your life to benefit from therapy.
Mhm.
It could be something that might seem to be a little smaller, such as, I want to improve how I communicate with people, or I want to have better boundaries in my life and learn to feel like I can protect those a little bit better.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I would say those would probably be the people that I would really be looking for to work with and want to help.
Yeah, yeah, and those areas so needed right now as well.
hmm
Curious a little bit about your work with trauma. Are there
hmm
specific, um, I guess, theories or techniques that you tend to gravitate towards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say probably the number one thing that I have been trained in and I practice is cognitive processing therapy.
Okay.
So that is kind of a little offshoot of CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And CPT, cognitive processing therapy, is really focused on those what I call stuck points that occur after a trauma. And those stuck points are how a person just processes their trauma. And oftentimes a stuck point could be, no one is safe or everyone is going to hurt me. And so CPT allows you to kind of balance out the stuck
Mm,
points and learn to be able to not only heal, but be able to just have a more balanced viewpoint of your trauma and how it's impacted you.
right, right, and have some more discernment on some of those things.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really cool. Really
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
Would you mind me asking a little bit about grief work? Because
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the hardest areas,
hmm
just because of there's not necessarily this big solution to that,
hmm
right? Where in couples work, you can say, hey, do
Yep.
X, Y, and Z, and let's see how that works. Grief work is a different ball game, I feel like. Would you mind
It
sharing a
really
little bit
is.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think why it's also so challenging is grief is like a fingerprint where we all grieve in a different way. And, if one person has had multiple losses in their life, they might even grieve those losses in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I would say probably the biggest piece, though, that I do with grief work is just understanding what grief is and those stages of grief. Because oftentimes I think people can feel like they're doing something wrong with
Yeah.
their grief,
Yeah.
especially if they see, their friend or their family member or somebody else grieving in a different way. It's really common of us as humans to want to compare ourselves to other people. And so with grief, I think it really is all about helping me, or that me helping my client to understand, what does your grief look like? And why is that okay? And learning to, and this is the hard part with grief, is to step into those emotions and really allow yourself to feel those, because the only way through grief is through it. And that is
Right.
feeling those feels and learning to take care of yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so beautifully spoken. Yes, that is the way. There's no other way. You can't step around it. You can't step over it. You can't
Yeah.
bury it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes. Very, very cool. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about like a typical session, because I know a lot of
Yeah.
times when someone comes in, and it's maybe their first time in therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely, if they're coming in, it would be their first time with you. And what does that look like? Just so somebody has an idea before they walk in. What's a typical session
Absolutely.
like?
No, and I think that part of what an initial session can look like too is not only, my client letting me know what is bringing them to therapy, but I think also having them communicate to me like what they're looking for in a therapist, and I think that many therapists have many different styles. And so what I would say about myself is that I'm pretty laid back. I use humor a lot of times, and especially in the beginning, because coming to see a therapist can feel really vulnerable and it can
Yeah,
feel sometimes very anxiety provoking. So I want to hear what's bringing you, and I will do that in just a very non judgmental way. Um, I would say that because of some of the things that I have experienced in my life, I not only can help you as a therapist guide you through that, but depending on the thing, I might also have some experience in knowing what that feels like to struggle with that or to go through that, specific with, loss and grief and trauma.
right.
So I would say a first session is just, let's get to know each other a little bit. Let me hear what's going on that's bringing you to therapy at this point in your life. And I also really want to hear what you might need from a therapist, and
Right.
sometimes I think people are looking for, a person who is just there to listen and not judge them. And other times a person might be looking for someone who's a little more direct that can
Mhm.
kind of help hold them accountable a little bit.
Yeah, yes, I think that flexibility is
Ah,
really important. And it's a strength. You have a strength there with that, because
mm-hmm.
a lot of times we, I guess almost like the old school way was like either you're a direct therapist or you're an
Right.
indirect therapist, and which are you, and that's the way you roll. And
Yeah.
I think now it just makes a lot of sense to think about, this
Mm-hmm.
person actually needs something different. They might
Yeah.
you might normally be an indirect, therapist. I tend towards, more of an indirect therapist
Mm-hmm.
role. But somebody comes in, they say, actually, I just want you to tell me exactly everything you are seeing. Don't hold back,
Yeah,
and that's an important thing, because that's what that
it
client
is.
needs in that moment. You can't get stuck into that. Well, I'm more this way though,
It
for
is.
finding that out too at the beginning, because if it's so
Yep.
far reaching in one direction, you know,
Absolutely.
being able to
Yep.
figure that out in that first session is essential. Yeah.
And I think too, another part of what I really like to hone in on a first session is if my client has seen other therapists in the past, because I think it's also helpful to hear from them, like what was helpful about your past therapy experience
Right.
and what maybe wasn't so helpful, just so I have an idea of what their past experiences have been. So I can maybe better tweak my approach in whatever my client is looking for in that moment.
Yeah. Yes. Such useful information, right? I mean,
It
even that
is.
question of what went well,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, gives
Yep.
you a good guide. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about something I pointed out as a strength I saw, and I
Yeah.
want to hear a little bit about. I heard a little bit too on some of those strengths of just experiencing some things
hmm
yourself, and I would imagine that being a huge strength as a therapist. Are there other strengths, or did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would say, probably another strength of mine, something that I really like to focus on. And this doesn't need to be for every single client, but I really like to give my clients something tangible to work on, focus on, have as a goal for in between sessions. Because, yes, when you're in session with your therapist, that's when you're doing great work and you're stepping into things. But that might be, 45 minutes, an hour, once a week, once every other week. And so you're left then with all of this other time. And so I really like to utilize like homework. And I know sometimes that sounds like, oh, homework, I don't want to do that. But,
Yeah.
worksheets or assignments or just like a prompt to think about or certain goals to really focus on. Because oftentimes, I've gotten feedback from clients who have seen previous therapists in the past where, it's great in session, but I don't really know what to do then outside of session. So I
Yeah.
really play that up a lot, and I like to give them tangible things to
Yeah.
focus on, to think on, to practice, so that they're also being able to practice and use the things that we're talking about in session too.
Yeah, yeah, and that is very cool, that transition of to the work you're doing here.
Yep.
Well, it can be amazing and wonderful, but if it's not transferring
Hmm.
outside of the
Yeah,
room, then it might not be really making too much of an impact, and they're not going to see the full benefits of it all. So I like
absolutely.
that. I like that, and even if it's a small, like seemingly small activity, but
Hmm.
something that brings them, a
Hmm.
piece of therapy into the outside world. Let's explore
Absolutely.
this week, or
Yep.
just notice how you feel when this
Yeah.
happens this week. That's
Mhm.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So, is there anything you think you would want your potential clients to know about you? Anything that you think, okay, this is one thing they should know, or I would want them to know?
I think just the one thing is that, yes, I'm a therapist, but I'm also a human being. And so, I think being a human being is just something that we oftentimes forget about, like when we're in therapy. And so, me being a human being, again, I have these experiences, I have this life that, you know, I can kind of utilize to my benefit in order to help my clients figure out what their goals are and what they want their path to
Right.
be. So, me as a human being, again, I'm really laid back. I oftentimes use humor in a lot of ways, and um, that's just kind of, I think, my approach and something that I
Yeah.
would really like a person to know about me when they're looking for a therapist.
Yeah. Yes, that's so important. I feel like is that understanding of like we're human and we're in that room with you
Yeah.
and we are working on stuff. We are,
Hmm.
using the same skills.
Exactly.
Not all the time is it going to match up
Hmm.
and it probably won't all the time match up, but that
Yeah.
we've tried some of these things. This is what works for us. This is what works
Hmm.
for our other clients. And I think that
Absolutely.
adds in this like additional layer of hey,
Hmm.
this actually works when you are doing
Yeah.
these things.
Yep.
Here's some examples. You
Hmm.
know, and I think that's one of the benefits of therapy now. It used to be
Yep.
so strict on what we did in those sessions, like do not
Yeah.
self-disclose at all.
Hmm.
And now I think the majority of us are starting to really recognize the importance and value of that
Hmm.
of, okay, well, this is a similar scenario. This is how I got through this. And not all the
Absolutely.
time. We're not always, we're not
Yep.
talking about us all the time, but when it's
Hmm.
needed, you know,
Absolutely. Yep.
which is a very, very useful tool.
Mhm.
So,
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yep.
yeah. Yeah. So, thank you again for meeting with me today,
Of
Deva.
course.
And let's talk a little bit about how someone can reach you. So, you can go to our website at
Hmm.
shoresighttherapies.com and you'll have Deva's information is all up there.
Yep.
And so you can reach out to her that way. You can schedule easily online,
Hmm.
um, and you can reach out to her as well if you want to schedule something. Openings right away this week. So that's
Openings right
even
away.
better. That's even
Yep.
better. So if you want to talk with Deva, go ahead and reach out to her. It was a pleasure talking with you today, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you,
All
Lori.
right.
All
All
right.
right.
Bye.
Bye.